Andrew once believed that loss had frozen his heart forever, but then Jasmine stepped into that cold, silent mansion, carrying a secret, a child, and a second chance at love, family, and the quiet magic of 1,000 paper cranes. But will the past ever let them go? The glossy black Mercedes glided smoothly through the automatic gate, its tires rolling lightly over the intricately patterned stone pathway. The late afternoon sunlight cast long streaks across the transparent glass walls of the villa, perched amidst the quiet hills north of Atlanta. But the modern, exorbitant beauty of it all, the meticulously crafted architectural lines, only made the house seem emptier. Andrew Sullivan, the man behind the wheel, was in no hurry. He never was when returning home. Perhaps because this place no longer felt like home. It was merely an expensive structure, holding frozen habits and memories. He opened the door and stepped out, his impeccable charcoal gray suit still crisp after the long flight from New York. The faint scent of polished oak wafted through as the doors swung open, and as usual, only silence greeted him. No welcoming voices, no hurried footsteps rushing toward him, no bright laughter from a little girl or a woman's voice calling down from the second floor. Just the steady hum of the air conditioner and the automatic lights flickering on with his movement. He set his briefcase down on the ebony table, where a vase of white flowers, replaced weekly by the housekeeper, still stood, pristine, tidy, cold. Rebecca, his wife, had been gone for nearly 2 years. A sudden stroke had stolen the woman who once made this house glow with morning light, even on the cloudiest days. After the funeral, Andrew spent nearly 6 months living at the office, eating and sleeping on a leather couch, burying himself in stocks, investment strategies, and 100-page contracts. He didn't cry, didn't complain, didn't share with anyone. Grief was wedged tightly between meetings. Chloe, his daughter, was only 4 when her mother passed. Now 6, her eyes seemed far older. The way she quietly ate dinner alone, no whining, no fussing, no mischief, made Andrew feel guilty. But he didn't know what to do. He'd once hired a child psychologist. She concluded that Chloe was adapting well but tended to internalize negative emotion. Andrew didn't fully understand, but he nodded, paid the fee, and returned to his numbers. Now Chloe had a French tutor, piano lessons, even origami classes, because someone said folding paper helped kids relax. Her days were segmented into blocks like an Excel spreadsheet. Eat, study, sleep, play, repeat. Everything was efficient. Nothing was warm. Andrew had once thought time would heal things on its own, but some wounds couldn't be stitched by time. Some houses couldn't become nests just because they had enough rooms and money. Standing at the staircase, looking up toward Chloe's room, Andrew heard the faint scratch of a pencil on paper. She was probably drawing or doing homework, per her schedule. A piano note rang out, precise as always, at 5 p.m., but no laughter, nothing that once made this house alive when Rebecca was here. He suddenly remembered the old cassette player Rebecca kept in the kitchen, the jazz tunes she'd play while baking, the scent of vanilla mingling with orange zest, her laughter when Chloe spilled flour across the floor. All of it was just a hazy memory now, beautiful but distant, like dusty photos in his phone he never opened. Why was it so hard? He was a man who could sway markets with a few nods in a boardroom, yet he was powerless before his own little girl, before the emptiness of this house. The doorbell rang. Andrew frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Chloe's schedule didn't show any extra lessons today either. He walked to the door and opened it. Standing before him was a brown-skinned woman, her hair tied neatly in a simple high bun. She wore tidy clothes, her gaze calm. One hand pulled a small suitcase, the other held a file. "Hello, I'm Jasmine Carter from the Premium Personnel Management Service. I'm here under the contract to be a childcare assistant for the Sullivan family." It took Andrew a second to piece it together. He'd signed that contract 3 weeks ago, after Chloe had asked him a question that left him stunned. "Dad, can you smile just once?" He didn't remember how he'd answered. But that night, he texted his assistant to find someone who can bring light into my home. And now, Jasmine was here. He opened the door wider. "Come in." Jasmine stepped inside. Her eyes swept over the space. She said nothing, but that look made Andrew realize something strange. She didn't see this villa as a palace, but as an abandoned house. And maybe she'd do something to change that. Andrew stepped into the house from his afternoon meeting, his collar still stiff from a too-tight tie, his mind buzzing with numbers. Atlanta in March had gentle sunlight, but he felt cold, as he always did when he came home. The glass villa welcomed him with silence, as frigid and pristine as a quarterly report. He didn't expect anything different, but then he stopped. A sound, something entirely unfamiliar, drifted from the back of the house. At first, it was like water, then laughter. Impossible. He frowned, set his briefcase down, and walked slowly along the stone-tiled hallway toward the backyard garden. The laughter echoed, clear, lingering, not from a TV or any electronic device. It was real. It was Chloe. He almost didn't recognize that laugh. How long had it been since she'd laughed like that? Since Rebecca's passing, Chloe's every expression had shrunk, as if she feared that being happy would betray her mother's sadness. The sound of splashing water, a soft call. "Again, Miss Jasmine, tsunami wave again." Andrew reached the glass edge and peered out. Time seemed to slow. Chloe sat in the shallow pool, her soft brown hair plastered with water, the afternoon sun illuminating her radiant face. In front of her was Jasmine, the woman who'd arrived just yesterday, sitting at the pool's edge, her feet dangling to create waves. "Here comes the tsunami," Jasmine shouted, kicking her feet harder. The water swirled into small spirals, rushing toward Chloe. The little girl squealed in delight. No tantrums, no grumpiness, no whining. Just a child, truly living. Andrew stood frozen. In just one day, one single day, the scene before him felt like a dream that had slipped into the wrong house. Strangely, he didn't want to wake from it. "Daddy!" Chloe spotted him first. She scrambled out of the water, her bare feet slapping against the stone tiles, leaving tiny wet footprints. Andrew instinctively stepped back, worried about water splashing his expensive suit. But then he stopped. His daughter was running toward him. How long had it been? How long since she'd last rushed to hug him without prompting? How long since he'd picked her up without worrying about wrinkling his clothes? Chloe crashed into his arms like a little storm. Cold water soaked into his shirt, but Andrew didn't feel cold anymore. She smelled of chlorine, strawberry candy, and something very much like happiness. Behind her, Jasmine stood up quickly, clearly flustered. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan. I didn't know you'd be back so early. I'll get Chloe inside to change and prepare dinner as scheduled." "It's fine," Andrew said, surprised at how his own voice had softened without him noticing. Jasmine paused, caught off guard. He noticed she was wearing a pale yellow sundress, barefoot, her hair still in a high bun, her cheeks flushed from laughing. She wasn't cold and composed like Rebecca. She was warm, natural, unguarded. Chloe chattered excitedly, pulling him toward the kitchen. "Daddy, me and Miss Jasmine made cookies. She taught me how to measure flour and crack eggs without breaking the yolks. Miss Jasmine is amazing." "Cookies from scratch?" Andrew asked, trying to keep his tone steady. Jasmine nodded, a little sheepish. "Chloe likes doing things from the start. I thought it might help her feel some control over a piece of this world." That statement made Andrew pause. Control over this world. Even he, a financial CEO, hadn't managed that in the past 2 years. In the kitchen, once, used only for display, the air now carried the rich scent of baked butter and cinnamon. On the table sat a plate of oddly shaped but golden cookies, and Chloe's scribbled drawings were taped to the glass window, something Rebecca had never allowed. "One for Daddy," Chloe said, handing him the most misshapen cookie. He took it, and took a bite. Not perfect, but very real. "Would you like me to make you some coffee, Mr. Sullivan?" Jasmine asked, her voice slowing. Andrew started to decline, then changed his mind unexpectedly. "Call me Andrew," he said. Their eyes met, a flicker of surprise, then slowly a gentle smile. Something in the air had shifted. In the quiet afternoon light streaming through the window, beneath crayon drawings and half-folded paper scraps, Andrew felt something he'd thought impossible. This house was coming back to life. Morning arrived. The Sullivan kitchen glowed with fine golden sunlight streaming through the towering glass panes, reflecting off the stone countertop like gilded threads. The air carried hints of strawberries and toasted bread, but Jasmine Carter felt nothing. She stood at the counter, knife in hand, slicing plump red strawberries. The blade was sharp, her cuts rhythmic, like mechanical motions, precise but lifeless. The phone in her apron pocket weighed like a stone. 3 missed calls from her mother that morning, each one an echo of another world, a world she'd tried to step back from but never truly left. She knew why. Caleb, her 3-year-old boy with eyes just like hers, feverish again, another ear infection. Nights of fevered crying until his voice grew hoarse, endless rounds of antibiotics stretching longer than his childhood. And this time, he was calling for his mom, not through a screen, but for real. Footsteps on the wooden floor snapped her out of her thoughts. "Good morning," came the familiar low voice. Andrew stood there, dressed in a perfectly tailored ash-gray suit, tie still unknotted. But what caught Jasmine's attention wasn't the suit. It was his eyes. Something in them softened. "Coffee's ready," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I made it stronger. It's Wednesday." Andrew paused mid-step. "You know I like my coffee strong on Wednesdays." "My job is to observe," she replied, not meeting his gaze, her hands still methodically slicing strawberries. Andrew fell silent. Jasmine felt her heartbeat quicken. She shouldn't have let that slip. She shouldn't feel so familiar. "You seem distracted," he said after a few seconds. Jasmine shook her head, just a little sleepless. "Is Caleb okay?" The knife froze mid-cut. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and realized she'd revealed more than she'd intended. "You know," she said. Andrew nodded. "I overheard a call by accident. I didn't mean to, but it's hard not to notice. Your voice when you talk to your son. It's not something you can fake." Jasmine tightened her grip on the knife handle, then set it down. "I didn't mean to deceive anyone," she whispered. I need this job. And I wasn't sure if someone like you, someone from your world, could accept a single mother like me." "There's too much at stake." Andrew didn't respond immediately. He stepped closer, taking the coffee cup from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, warm and human. "You're not the only one with something to lose," he said slowly. "I thought I'd lost everything when Rebecca died. But then I realized loss has no bottom. It just changes shape." From eyes to silence, Jasmine looked at him, 100 unspoken questions swirling in her eyes. The biggest one, "What do you want from me?" Chloe appeared, her school uniform neat, though one hand still clutched a half-folded paper crane. "Miss Jasmine said if I fold 1,000 cranes, I get a wish," Chloe said brightly. "I think I know what I'd wish for." "What's that, princess?" Andrew asked. "For Miss Jasmine to never leave." No one spoke. In that instant, a tiny crack formed in Jasmine's heart, like a silent sob she couldn't voice. She knew she was going too far, becoming too essential to this little girl, too real to step away without leaving scars. And she knew she was growing too attached to this place, this house that wasn't hers, this family that didn't belong to her, this smile she wasn't sure she had the right to hold on to. Just then, her phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it. "Mom, Caleb's crying for you. Still feverish. Doctor says monitor for 24 more hours." Her fingers trembled. Chloe tugged at her hand. "Miss Jasmine? Are you okay?" Jasmine bent down and gave Chloe a gentle hug, the girl's head resting on her shoulder, just like Caleb's whenever he was feverish and seeking his mom. 2 worlds, 2 children, 1 heart, and she was tearing apart between them. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm okay." But when she glanced at Andrew, Jasmine saw something shift in his eyes. He knew. He was seeing the fracture behind her smile, and he didn't look away. That night, Atlanta was drenched in rain. Not a torrential downpour, but a sad, persistent drizzle, as if the sky itself were quietly enduring an unnamed pain. Jasmine stood in the dark kitchen, the only light spilling from the LED strip beneath the cabinets, casting a faint, warm glow over the countertop, a warmth she couldn't feel at all. She had just finished putting away dinner, washing the dishes, wiping her hands on a gray towel, and she stood still, silent, as if by not moving time might stop too. But the phone in her apron pocket wouldn't let her rest. A new message from her mother. "Mom, Caleb's fever is back. He won't sleep. Keeps asking, 'Where's Mommy?'" That simple question stabbed into her chest like a knife. And what scared Jasmine most wasn't the fever. It was the familiarity of absence. She feared that one day Caleb would stop asking. Footsteps echoed behind her, quiet, slow, and heavy. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Andrew. "You're still awake?" His voice was low, warm, slightly hoarse, as if he too had been standing in this house for a long time, waiting for something to break. "I can't sleep," Jasmine replied, her eyes still fixed on her hands twisting together. "Does the rain make you anxious?" She shook her head slightly. He stepped closer. "Is it Caleb?" That name shattered every layer of her defenses. Jasmine turned to him, lips pressed tight, eyes beginning to sting. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to see you tormenting yourself," Andrew said softly, "and long enough to know you need to be asked. Jasmine, are you okay? Not, did you finish Chloe's schedule? Or, is the bread out of the oven? But you, just you, are you okay?" Jasmine let out a small, pained laugh. "I'm not okay, Andrew. I haven't been for a long time." And then it all came rushing out, like a flood held back too long. "I have a son. His name's Caleb. He's 3. His father left when I was pregnant, leaving me with debt, a moldy apartment, and a promise he never kept. I worked every job I could, cleaning hotel rooms, babysitting, washing dishes, anything to provide for him. But when my mom found out Caleb had chronic ear infections, she said, 'We need better conditions.' So I applied for this job. Good pay, a place to stay, a shred of hope." Her voice broke. "But I knew if I said I was a single mom, I wouldn't get picked, because no one wants complications. So I stayed quiet. I thought, just a few months. Work, send money home, then leave." She looked up, eyes wet. "But then," Chloe smiled. She hugged me. "And you made me feel seen, not as a maid, but as someone present, and I let my heart go too far." She took a step back. "I'm sorry. I'll pack my things and—" "Stop." Andrew's voice cut. True, restrained but firm. He stepped forward, gently but resolutely, touching her arm. "Jasmine, if your purpose was to bring warmth back to this life, then you've done it. Chloe's come alive since you walked in here, and He paused, searching for words. "I have too." She looked at him, doubt and fear mingling in her gaze. "But I lied. You didn't tell everything, but you didn't abandon anyone either. You carried love, so much love. And that's never a crime. You don't understand. Caleb's sick. I have to. Then let me go with you." She froze. "What?" "You don't have to fight alone anymore. You don't have to bear being a mother in the shadows. I want to help, not just because Chloe loves you, but because He stopped, taking a deep breath. "I've been waiting for you, without even knowing it." Jasmine broke down, not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because for the first time someone saw the whole truth of her and didn't turn away. She said nothing, just stepped forward, resting her head against his chest. Outside, the rain began to ease. On the window pane, tiny droplets slid down, slow light, as if the sky too had just let out a sigh. Monday morning began as usual, clear skies, gentle sunlight, and Chloe skipping around the kitchen with her 397th paper crane in hand. But by midday the atmosphere in the Sullivan villa had shifted, thick and wary, like the calm before an unannounced storm. Andrew was in a Zoom meeting when his phone rang. The name flashing on the screen made his heart skip a beat. Walter Harrington, Rebecca's father, the real estate tycoon of the Southeast United States, the man who'd always seen Andrew as a mediocre startup kid who stole his daughter. They hadn't spoken since the funeral, and now he was calling. The call lasted less than 3 minutes, but when it ended, Andrew stood frozen by the glass door, his hand clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. Jasmine watched him from a distance, sensing something was wrong. "Who just called?" she asked softly. "Walter," he replied, his voice heavy. She paused. What did he want? Andrew turned to her, his gaze sharp as a blade. "He's suing me for custody of Chloe." The kitchen seemed to freeze. "On what grounds?" Jasmine asked, her voice catching. "On morality and an unsuitable living environment." He tossed his phone onto the table. "He knows about you, about Caleb, about you living here." Jasmine felt the blood drain from her face. "He'll use my son like a weapon." "No," Andrew said, his voice firm as steel. "He thinks this is a weakness, but it's what makes us stronger. You're not carrying this alone." But Jasmine wasn't sure. Since when had she believed in miracles like that? That afternoon, when Chloe got home from school, her eyes lit up at the sight of her grandfather waiting. She ran to him. "Grandpa?" Walter bent down, hugging his granddaughter, but his gaze didn't stray from Jasmine standing by the steps. That look was colder than a Nordic winter. "I want to speak to the child's father," he said. No greeting for Jasmine. "I can invite you in," she offered, trying to keep her voice steady. "No need." He looked straight at her. "I'm not here to exchange pleasantries with the help." Andrew stepped out of the house just in time to hear that. "She's not the help," he said, each word deliberate. "She's the person Chloe trusts, the one who made her smile again. She's—" Walter raised a hand. "The person you're living with, unmarried, in a house with her own young child. In the eyes of the law and the Family Appeals Board, that's fertile ground for the decay of a child's upbringing." Jasmine stood silent, her face pale. Chloe didn't fully understand yet, but her small hand reached for Jasmine's. "Miss Jasmine is family," Chloe said quietly. "I don't want you to make her sad." Walter flinched. He looked at his granddaughter. "Chloe, you care about her that much?" "I wish I could live with her. And Caleb too," Chloe said, lifting her chin. "I want a little brother." Walter turned to Andrew, his voice low. "Don't you see? The child's being stuffed with emotional fantasies instead of reality. My granddaughter should be learning ballet and diplomacy, not folding paper cranes and baking with the person who saved her from depression," Andrew cut in. "With the one who brought life back to a home you once let fall apart." Silence. Walter's face darkened. He pulled a stack of papers from his leather briefcase. "The official lawsuit will be delivered to your lawyer tomorrow morning." When Walter left, Jasmine stood quietly by the door, her hand still gripping the wooden frame as if it could hold up everything that had just crashed down. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I brought trouble here." Andrew turned to her. "No. He's not attacking you. He's attacking us. And he'll have to learn. Family isn't just made by blood. It's made by love. By choice." A rustling sound came from behind. Chloe was folding a new crane. She looked up. "We're fighting for our family, right, Dad?" Andrew knelt down, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Yes, Princess. Our family is the most worth fighting for in the world." Jasmine looked at the father and daughter, then out at the sky, where heavy clouds were beginning to gather. A storm was coming, but this time she wasn't alone in it. The Atlanta sky that day was an uncanny shade of blue. No trace remained of the storm that had swept through days earlier, The storm Walter Harrington had brought with his stack of legal papers and the cold, rigid gaze of an old world steeped in prejudice. But today the sky was calm, and in the backyard of the Sullivan villa, something was blooming. Jasmine stood beneath the maple tree, holding the 999th paper crane, its pale yellow wings matching the color of the first dress she'd worn when she arrived here. "Who gets the last one?" she asked softly. "Miles, of course," Chloe chirped. "He's gotten so much better at folding since he came here, you know, Mom." Mom. The word flowed through Jasmine's ears like a melody she'd once feared she'd never hear. Chloe had called her Mom. It started a week ago, naturally, without hesitation, without explanation, and Jasmine had burst into tears right in the middle of heating a pot of hot chocolate. Miles, the 3-year-old who once curled up crying every night, calling Mommy through a phone screen, was now toddling across the grass, clutching a Cebu paper crane, chasing his big sister with peals of laughter. "Dad, look at this." Chloe held up a string of hanging cranes, the paper, birds swaying in the afternoon sun like a living rainbow. Andrew looked up from the wooden table where he was slicing fruit for Miles. "You've hung them beautifully. But wait until we fold the last one before putting them all up, okay?" "Then you fold it, Mom," Chloe pleaded, turning to Miles. "We're about to make our wish. Maybe eternal cookies, or a real telescope." Jasmine sat down. Above her, hundreds of colorful paper cranes swayed in the breeze like 1,000 whispered hopes. She took a deep breath and picked up a pristine white sheet of paper. No color, no pattern, a blank page, like a beginning. Her hands began to fold, each crease, each edge, gentle yet firm, folding like a prayer. Andrew quietly approached, standing behind her. "When you came here," he said, "I didn't think this house would ever hear the sound of happiness again." Jasmine didn't look up. "I didn't think my heart had room for anyone else either. And yet you made it happen." He leaned down, whispering close to her ear. "You didn't just fold this kitchen back together. You folded my whole life." She smiled. "Not folded back, folded forward, like a new crane." She held up the 1,000th crane, pure white, simple, but the brightest under the sunlight. "What do we wish for now?" Chloe asked, her eyes sparkling. The family fell silent. Then Jasmine answered, slowly. "I wish that no matter what happens, we'll keep choosing each other, tomorrow and every day after." Andrew took her hand, and Chloe, without waiting for an invitation, squeezed between them, wrapping her arms around both. Miles ran over, grinning wide, demanding a group hug, and so they stood beneath the canopy of paper cranes, like a promise that needed no paperwork. In the corner of the garden, Walter Harrington watched silently, no longer the stern old businessman, but just an elderly man with trembling hands holding a paper crane, given to him by Miles. "For you, there's magic inside," the boy had said with earnest sincerity before running off. As if no distance had ever existed between them, Walter gazed at the family before him. Children not bound by blood but united in laughter under the sun. A woman he'd once dismissed as the help turning this house into a true home. And his former son-in-law, once as solitary as a stone statue, now living, not just surviving. He stepped back and pulled out his phone. "Withdraw the lawsuit," he told his lawyer. "Not just because I lost, but because I was wrong about what family means." Night fell, and the paper cranes glowed faintly under the string lights draped around the garden. Chloe and Miles had fallen asleep in each other's arms on the outdoor couch, while Andrew and Jasmine sat on the grass, leaning against the tree trunk. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" he asked softly. "I'll be here," she replied. "Because now, this isn't just a job, it's home." He leaned down, his lips brushing her forehead. "And I'll keep choosing you. Every day." Above them, the final white crane spun gently, like an invisible wind chime ringing out a blessing. A family had been reborn, not perfect but real, not bound by blood but by love. Not easy, but worth it. And that was all the magic it needed.